Governments in the global south, don't be in the shadow. Remember where you come from, the struggles of your people through their efforts and sacrifice and blood. This is the time to stand together for something better.
Israel has been bombing Gaza for over a year, but most of the world governments have either failed to stop the genocide or, in the case of the US, actively blocked the United Nations from taking action. The US has vetoed a ceasefire resolution 4 times.
Maybe for some we have the wrong nationality, the wrong faith, the wrong skin color. But we are humans. Is there an international law for them, an international law for us? Do they have the right to kill, and the only right we have is to die?
Meanwhile, departments of the UN have been openly criticizing Israel's actions for months. Francesca Albanese is the Special Rapporteur assigned by the UN to investigate human rights abuses of Palestinians by Israel.
Israel is an apartheid state which has been predicated upon the erasure of the Palestinians, the dehumanization of the Palestinians.
Since the UN was created, it has been inextricably linked to the question of Palestine. It's also the place where countries can create and codify international law.
International law is not just a promise, it's a set of obligations. They are universal. They apply to the powerful and the weak, to the rich and the poor, to the large and the small.
But international law feels unequal when it comes to stopping Israel's assault on the Palestinian people. So what exactly was the UN's role in Palestine? How can the Global South community replicate previous successes to liberate the Palestinian people? And what does the future hold if countries no longer abide by international law? Francesca Albanese wrote 2 reports this year about Israel's genocide in Gaza. Her first report was titled Anatomy of a Genocide.
I concluded that Israel had committed at least 3 acts of genocide, acts of killing, infliction of severe bodily and mental harm, and creations of conditions of life that would lead to the destruction of the Palestinians in Gaza in whole or in part, supported by genocidal intent.
7 months later, she wrote a new report, Genocide as Colonial Erasure.
This is a state endeavor committed intentionally by state officials, military, political leadership, religious leadership. So all the state apparatus has been complicit in the crimes that have been committed against the Palestinians.
But Albanese also wants people to know that this isn't something new. It's been happening since the Nakba and Israel's creation in 1948.
Since its very inception, Palestinians have been forcibly displaced, dispossessed, increasingly segregated, and arrested and detained en masse. Their homes have been destroyed, their churches and mosques, their identity has become a liability. They have all become, through decades of Israeli unlawful occupation in what remains of Palestine, a security threat, a presumed guilty until proven innocent. So the history of the Palestinians at the hand of the State of Israel has been one of continuous ethnic cleansing. What happens today is what a settler colonial genocide looks like. This is the kind of destruction of a people in whole or in part that happens in a context where one people wants to dominate, take the land and the resources from another people and push them away, because their very existence as indigenous people is an identity and legal threat to the occupier, to the colonizer.
The United Nations was formed in 1945 primarily by the 5 major powers who won World War II: the Soviet Union, China, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States.
When the United Nations came into existence, it was constituted by 51 states. Most of the world was still colonized, meaning controlled land, resources, and people, primarily by European countries.
That included Palestine, which was under UK control, and tensions were high in the region after an influx of Jewish immigrants from Europe. 2 years after the UN was created, the UK tasked it with resolving what should happen to Palestine. The UN decided to partition the land. The UN plan would have given the Jewish settler minority, which only accounted for 1/3 of the population, the majority of the land. The much larger indigenous Arab Palestinian population would get a much smaller portion. And Jerusalem was to be an international zone. The plan was rejected by the Palestinian people, but Israel used the plan to declare independence, and when war broke out, to forcibly displace nearly 3/4 of the indigenous Palestinian population in what's now known as the Nakba, or catastrophe.
Palestine is unique, but is not unique. It's unique in the sense that it's standing tall and resisting the erasure that a colonial mindset has brought upon them. But this is what in history has happened to other colonized people.
While most other countries went through decolonization in the 20th century, Israel did the opposite. After the war in 1967, Israel colonized all the Palestinian land. To this day, it controls who can enter and leave the occupied territories and has been building more illegal settlements on Palestinian land every year.
And I know that this is painful to hear for Israelis and Israeli youth in particular who love Israel, and I don't blame them, but the point is that their country is imposing an apartheid regime on the Palestinians and is trying to erase the Palestinians from whatever remains of Palestine, which is what settler colonial powers in Australia, in Canada, in the United States have done with their indigenous people.
As decolonization expanded around the world, the UN expanded too. Now there are 193 member states, but only the 5 permanent members of the Security Council have veto power.
It has been quite a journey for most people in the world to liberate themselves from the yoke of this control, which is not completely undone. There are still ties, economic, military ties, financial ties. The system has changed over time, and in my view, the major revolution came about with the decolonization, which gave impetus to a number of changes in the international system.
Albanese says the UN has been successful in the past at holding countries committing human rights abuses accountable.
Think of the Apartheid Committee that was set up to deal with the dismantlement of apartheid South Africa, with the identification of what apartheid was, and then little by little with dismantlement of the apartheid regime there. Israel is an apartheid state which has been predicated upon the erasure of the Palestinians. We need to act, we need to coalesce, we need to remember that we decide how much we support or we do not support this system by also adhering to what are the goals of the Palestinian movement, which is acting like it was against apartheid South Africa to boycott, to divest and sanction the Israeli unlawful endeavor. And also, again, build coalition, build alliances.
And it seems there are coalitions building. Recently, Malaysia, partnering with other countries, proposed expelling Israel from the United Nations because of the genocide.
Israel no longer belongs within the civilized community of nations.
It is not the first time that we see countries from the global south taking upon themselves the struggle to bring about justice. It's natural because they are more aware than us in Western societies about the risks of permanent control and disempowerment.
Albanese says she can understand why many young people would feel like the UN and the international community is not doing enough.
Of course, the international justice system has dragged its feet. Of course, the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor should have acted before October 7, because it was already criminal enough, and the alleged perpetrators were already bragging about their crimes.
The International Criminal Court, which is independent from the UN, did finally issue arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant over war crimes in Gaza.
And now the UN face an unprecedented attack from Israel, the United Nations, whose premises and beneficiaries have been bombed, hit by Israeli weapons this year in Gaza, but also peacekeepers in Lebanon. And the Secretary General has been declared persona non grata, The General Assembly, the International Criminal Court, the Human Rights Council, everyone has been accused by Israel to be harboring terrorists or anti-Semites. This is unacceptable. This is why The test is how much the United Nations today manages to push back this hubris.
Albanese says she views now as a chance to help bring about change.
The time is ripe for a revolution to make the system better. It's important that especially young people understand the potential of this moment to make the world a better place, because on the time it takes to make the realization and act, it depends how many people will be able to save in Gaza and in Palestine.
The first thing she recommends people should do is hold their own governments accountable.
Justice starts at home by making sure that those policymakers who have enabled, in this specific case, the genocide to be invoked, to unfold, to continue, they have to be held accountable. Businesses from your own country who have profited from the unlawful occupation, the apartheid, and now the genocide. Every time we purchase from these businesses, we participate a little bit in the maintenance of the unlawful occupation and apartheid regime.
According to Albanese, what the UN does provide is a forum for people to have a discussion to prevent conflict. But the UN has been unable to do that because of pushback from Israel with US support.
The United Nations doesn't exist as a virtuous system other than us. It sums up who we are as member states, as family of nations, with its goods and bads, like with its setbacks and virtues. So we shouldn't romanticize or idealize what the United Nations is. However, this is a place where discussions on how to prevent conflict, how to ensure peace and stability for everyone, how to advance equality and freedom for everyone is to be held and then reflected into international policies.
Even though it hasn't been able to stop the genocide, Albanese says the previous successes of the UN shouldn't be overlooked.
It has allowed developing countries, global south countries, to liberate themselves and to make the system a little bit better. Let's build on this and make the system even better, because I'm really afraid of what we might be facing. Lacking that is the return to a place of lawlessness where might make right, and we don't need to go there.
Albanese says her message to Western leaders hasn't changed since October 2023.
The slaughtering of children after children after children. I mean, how many other children need to die before our political leaders come to senses? Why not to be remembered for something good instead of destroying the planet? Do the right thing. Start by abiding by international law. Lead your country into a virtuous path.